and welcome back to 3 Lessons from Breakthrough Leaders with me, Zana Ryabchik, CEO of Breakthrough Global. I'm here again with Dr. Bart Sale.
Hello, everyone.
And this podcast is all about giving you insider tips and the know-how from the world's foremost leaders and creative talents, distilling their knowledge and experience into 3 lessons, which we guarantee will help you and your companies to unleash your potential. Dr. Jamie Bechtel is a globally recognised conservation expert with over 25 years of experience in 35 countries. She's the founder of the Kito Impact Foundation, which helps businesses align with social and environmental responsibility. And she also leads Yellowcard, a platform for corporate culture change, and Last Mile Justice, supporting environmental justice for Indigenous communities. A proven innovator, Jamie has advised organisations like the UN and the Clinton Global Initiative, and has been honoured by the Fast Company magazine as one of 16 women heroes changing the world.
Hello, Jamie. It's so good to have you here. Jamie and I go back several years. Do you want to say a little bit about how we met and go from there?
Yeah, sure. I was a marine conservationist actually at Conservation International. And you were working with Bill Wrigley. And Bill was a passionate marine conservationist. And he started engaging with Conservation International. And we met through a series of conversations and projects about how to save the world's oceans. So there are so many lessons, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but there's so many lessons to be learned about when you bring different people together to bring their different perspectives and expertise. And obviously the reason we connected so recently was because of your expertise and how that shaped me and what I'm doing now 20 years later, right? When I was working in this space that was a very, conservation remains a very male-dominated space, particularly at the leadership levels. But I remember specifically and distinctly when I worked with Bill Wrigley and you, that I felt so heard and so welcome and so able to contribute at my best level of performance because of the way I felt in that room that you and Bill created with what I now understand to be a methodology, effectively, a way of being and a way of learning to be as a leader. I still have lessons learned from it all these many years later. So thank you for the experience.
Lesson 1, the art of listening. One of the things we say in Breakthrough is that listening is one of the most powerful skills a leader can have, but also that it's the listening that creates the speaking. And then in terms of leadership itself, we sort of see a ladder of mastery. It goes through knowing about leadership to talking about. A lot of people talk about leadership, and then you get into doing leadership. But doing leadership is not the top of that ladder. It's being a leader. So it's a state of being. And I think you put it into words because Bill had that very much about being a leader. And
Yes.
That's what people feel around him. So,
And I think what people forget is that, leadership is not just the CEO. No matter where you're at, if you're in the mailroom or if you're in the, whatever, you're a leader. People are watching, and that listening, and I see this now in all kinds of ways all over the world, is listening isn't just about when somebody walks into your office, hearing them when they're there. Sometimes it's going to them. When I left Conservation International and founded a new nonprofit, co-founded it with my husband, actually, really centered on gender. And at the time, people thought I lost my mind because I had quit my job at CI to do this. But I really realized that I needed to be able to articulate in my own voice what I was seeing out in the world without, any company with any brand is going to have some constraints on it. And this was such a raw and fresh topic at the time. This was about 15 years ago. But sometimes I would be in a meeting room in Kenya or Uganda or, Fiji, and there'd be no women there. So I would go and find the women, finding people where they're at. There's, as you know, famous stories of Bill Clinton on weekends. President Clinton would go into the offices of the West Wing and just walk around and talk to people, right? And so listening is I think more than that very apparent when somebody's there. So Bill would come to our offices. I remember the first time I sat next to him at dinner, and we talked about our kids, and there was this inclusivity in his approach to leadership that was very powerful.
Part of our mission statement is actually you start with people. You don't start with business, you start with people. And if you want to transform a business, you need to transform the people first.
Yes. I used to tell the story, if you go into a village and a woman has never been allowed in the meeting space and she's never been asked what her opinion, and you ask her what she thinks, she's got some stuff to say. She's got years of having been in the thick of it. She's got all of the solutions. And people will sort of ask me, how do you know when to stop listening? And it's very simple. At some point, whoever you're listening to is going to turn to you and say, what do you think? Mm-hmm. And that's your cue, right? So that's my challenge to myself, is wait for what do you think? Or did that make sense? Or, that cue that, thank you for listening. Yeah.
Part of my background is in anthropology. And I can remember something that really touched me and is still with me. I was working out in Nigeria, and I remember interviewing this man who was about probably in his 60s. He was a gardener. I was interviewing them about, of all things, it was a commercial. I was working for Unilever at the time, but we wanted to understand what their personal grooming behavior and habits were to sell more products, of course. But anyway, I was enjoying the anthropology side of it. And I remember asking him for a conversation, and I was asking him this, and really, at the end of the conversation, there were tears in his eyes, and he grabbed hold of my hand with both hands. And he said, "Thank you, sir." He said, "Nobody has ever asked my opinion before."
Mm-hmm. It's
incredible.
So powerful.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that happens is when you come in with an agenda, you ask a certain series of questions that's expected, right? Yeah. So I was working with a client. I was in the Galapagos a couple of years ago, and there was a farm, and the sort of regular, usual question and answer session happened. My client, who had been there for a long period of time, they were done with their questions. So I sort of said, what role does your wife have on the farm? And he said, well, mostly it's women who go to the farmer training, but we have 2 children with learning disabilities, and she is a full-time caretaker for the children. So my follow-up question was, 2 children with learning disabilities. Are there a lot of children with learning disabilities in the village? Right. And he said, yes. And I said, is it from pesticide use? And he said, no, it's from the water. In years and years of working in this community, it was a simple fix, a relatively simple fix, but the question had never been asked.
So what's that phrase? The answer is in the question. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And it's ubiquitous. You can, if you're teaching soccer, your kid's soccer team, or you're, in the boardroom, those questions make all the difference.
Yeah. As Jamie said, listening is such an important foundational skill for leaders. And in Breakthrough, we take this very seriously. The quality of your communication is more to do with the way you listen. Our aim in Breakthrough is to help people transform their listening. And the way that's done is to distinguish that we're already listening to ourselves and our inner voice before we start listening to anyone else. And it's learning how to control and manage the inner voice that helps you to listen better, listen fully, and listen in a very different way.
So ask yourself, as a leader, are you putting the majority of your emphasis when it comes to communication on how you listen and how you listen powerfully to the other person that you're in a conversation with? Or are you actually putting most of your emphasis on how you're going to speak next? Are you one of those people that's almost waiting for the chance for the other person to stop so that you can speak again? Because if that's the case, you're not managing your inner voice. You're not learning how to dial that down and dial it up appropriately.
Lesson 2. Yellowcard. Calling out bias in leadership. So, Jamie, one of the things you mentioned earlier, which has intrigued me, is Yellowcard. So, can you tell us more about that?
So Yellowcard is a project that I'm just getting ready to launch. Let me back up just a little bit. I turned 52 years ago. So the week that I turned 50, I was in a meeting with a Silicon Valley investor and some Stanford folk. And the Silicon Valley investor said, "Jamie, you be quiet while I introduce you." Apparently this was kind of funny. And so the other guy said to the other woman on the call, "You be quiet while I introduce you." And so the next day, the investor called to ask me how I thought the call went. And I said, well, besides the fact that the two women on the call were actively silenced, and his response was, "Well, I just know you have such a good sense of humor, and I was just being funny."
Well, that's classic passive aggression. I mean, passive aggressive comment, and when it's called, they'll say, "I was joking."
And right, thank you. That the idea that my bad sense of humor is an excuse for your terrible joke just really caught me, rubbed me the wrong way. So I provide that context to say Yellowcard was born of this frustration. And Yellowcard is really this concept of we can all go to leadership training, and some leadership trainings are better than others, but those teachable moments are escaping so many of us.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be highly confrontational. We need a tool that sort of says, hey, not cool. Yellowcard itself is a tool to call out those microaggressions in the workplace. And I have learned to use Yellowcard. I have been Yellowcarded for things, I asked somebody about a spirit animal, and I was like, "What's your spirit animal?" And in a meeting, and a young woman, she knew about yellow. She said, "Jamie, that's a Yellowcard. That is the misappropriation of very sacred religions." And she was right. And it wasn't a drama. And I know not to do that now. And I'm a better leader for it. And so Yellowcard is a specific tool. And, one of the important parts of leadership is continuing to hone our skills, right? Surgeons don't stop practicing doing surgery. Police officers don't stop brushing up on the law, right? So as leaders, we have an obligation, especially as we're leading younger generations or people from different cultures, to continue to hone our craft. And so Yellowcard is the sort of bringing together of those tools that enable a space where people feel like they can deliver their best, which has a great bottom line for a company.
So this is great. Where do you want Yellowcard to go?
The impact that I want Yellowcard to have is that every woman has the tools she needs to advocate for herself in the workplace. And every woman in a position of leadership every woman with agency and every guy have the tools that they need to advocate and help to create space. And interestingly, there have been a few women, but it has been men who have helped to create space for me. So when I joined the board that I'm on now, it was a man who I didn't know anything about being on boards at the time. I was being quiet and listening. And one of the guys on the board said, "Jamie, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this." and actively created that space. And now I'm chair of the board because those thoughts led to change in the company. And that was a great experience. So men have a very, very important role. And there are a lot of men, almost the same number of men, who see the patterns of microaggression and they just don't know what to do about it. And so on our podcast, for example, we always ask the women that we have on to bring a male ally on. And it's a conversation. One of the things that does is help to remove othering. This is not just a space for women. This is a leadership space.
Mm-hmm.
And leadership, if you look at the studies and the book Yellowcard, and a lot of our content is quite scientific, actually. So we look at studies. There are fantastic studies about the Supreme Court. And they've analyzed the recordings and the number of interruptions that are done by the men on the Supreme Court toward the women, right? Or if there's been analysis of shareholder meetings, and men occupy 98% of the airwaves in those meetings. So we know that men are still occupy most of the traditional leadership spaces, and we know that there's a leadership crisis. So what we're doing is not working. So this is an alternative way to pursue change, which includes capturing those teachable moments and aggregating information for all parties. This is a subtle way to hopefully change that workspace.
So the reason that we love the Yellowcard concept is because it's simple. And from all of the experience that we have at Breakthrough, we know that simple tools are the best tools. Often what can happen when there's a difficult conversation or something where people are not sure, they don't want to put their foot in it, they don't want to say the wrong thing, we can really overcomplicate the way that we approach it. And it ends up with actually people saying nothing at all. So by having the yellow card, it's fun, it's lighthearted. You can use it with your friends, you can use it with your family, you can use it with a colleague, but you know that it's got a deep meaning and a profound meaning behind it that will enact a change of response, that will enact a difference of behaviour in the future. So we'd encourage people to start using it. It's really easy to use and it will have an impact.
Lesson 3. We need a variety of lived experiences. In our conversations leading to the podcast and getting to know each other again, what I've been impressed about is that in your conservation era, you and places like Conservation International, one of the things that they were attempting to do is bringing business to conservation. But what you've done now is you've sort of reversed that process, and you're now taking some of those principles of, it's beyond conservation what you talk about, but it's really humanity, and taking those now back into the business world.
That's exactly what I've been doing. And I had a few years of, I might almost say, insecurity around it because, again, I'm trained, I have a PhD in marine ecology and I have a law degree in international law, which is more traditional, I guess you might say. But I had this very bizarre experience where I worked with some of the biggest business people in the world, all the way down to I would go sailing with fishermen or spend the night cooking with women in huts. So I had this array. And what I started noticing is I would be brought on the panels to translate between the top down and the bottom up. And to really, turn to this person and say, let me give you an example of what this looks like on the ground. I didn't realize how transferable the skill set was. And that's because the skill set was this very diverse education of talking to so many people and listening to so many people and bringing that very holistically to bear in leadership. And then pivoting and sort of saying, wait a minute, this is actually, no matter where you walk. I was just in the Prime Minister of Fiji's office, for example. And I was saying to him, he built Fiji Air, and I'm terrified of flying. And, I said to him, look, I am an authority on alcohol on airplanes because I drink on every flight I'm on. And we had a great laugh over it, right? And so right away, you're connecting on a human level. And that's really what leadership is finding those points of connection and finding, recognizing that we are all equal players.
Yeah.
One of my biggest pet peeves, and I write about this in Yellowcard, women are often defined as rising stars. Oh, she's a rising star. You never hear men defined as rising stars. In fact, I remember there was one day I was at CI and I was kind of mad. And I was like, I am a breaking star right now. I will be a brighter star someday. I will be a dimmer star someday, but I'm a star. So when women say, like, I'm kind of a rising star in this, I shut them down right away. And I say, you're a star. Don't let anybody tell you you're not. And you're going to be more influential and you're going to be less influential, but you're not rising. You're a star. So anyhow, on that, making sure that we understand that we're all human. We all have this great equalizer, and then you're able to meet people and understand they're part of your solution. They're part of what you need to do. So that, I think that ethos of there's benefit to talking to everyone. There's solutions in talking to everyone. There's joy, frankly, in talking to everyone. I've never met a person who doesn't have a great story.
In our briefing call, I was very taken with your views on diversity in leadership, but particularly about diverse thinking, because it's not just about gender. It's not just about race. And that chimes with my feelings about diversity in its most holistic sense.
I think an interesting way to think about diversity, in part because everybody, there's a lot of baggage around the word diversity, but the goal is really it's twofold. One is to eliminate othering, right?
So inclusion, yeah.
It's inclusion, but it's that, othering is a natural instinct. It's innate to us. We feel safer when we're with people that are like us. And so what happens, fast forward to diverse thinking, is if we're all similar and we're all saying the same thing because that's what's safe, we're not getting the business solutions that we want. We're getting yes people. We're getting very sophisticated, very smart yes people who are very good at making it sound like they're not yes people, right? Because none of us are yes people. We all have our fight in us. But that's effectively what's happening. And so that stymies growth, it stymies production, and it stymies the ability of a business to be its most successful entity. And so diversity does not have to necessarily mean two things. One, just because you have a diverse room doesn't mean you have diversity of thought. And just because you have a room that looks similar to each other physically does not mean you don't have diversity of thought. It's really about those backgrounds. It's really about the training that somebody has had. It's really about, and I say this to young people, I've just started changing my advice dramatically for young people with the inbound of AI and the here-ness of AI. The only thing 20, 30 years from now that is going to be valued is that personal journey and what you as an individual can contribute, because that coherence of thought, that singularity of thought will be wiped out by AI. It's already happening. But your individual journey, the questions that you learn to ask along the way, the personal experiences that you have that distinguish you from all others, that is the only thing that will be valued in the very near future. And so learning to find that diversity of thought, utilize that diversity of thought. If you're not a leader that's good at that, you're not going to be a leader in the near future.
What impressed me about Jamie, and why I was so excited to have her on our podcast, is that her journey, she's had many, many different experiences and many, many different lived experiences. And she now sees that as key to creating a diverse team or diversity within a team. Often diversity is seen in a one-dimensional or couple-dimensional way. But when you start to think about the diversity of thought and the diversity of experience that people can bring and use as a resource within the team, then you get something much more powerful.
But as human beings, we really love being comfortable. And so we tend to congregate towards people who are similar to us, have similar interests to us, have similar lived experiences to us. And this stops us growing. It stops our horizons from shifting. So ask yourself, am I in my comfort zone at the moment? Do I have conversations with people that seem to agree with me all the time? And if that's the case, how can I expand that network? How can I expand the conversations that I'm having so that I'm making sure I have that exposure to people with very different lived experiences to my own in order to come up with the best solutions to solve problems, in order to come up with the best strategies for the organisation, and to make sure that you haven't missed something, to make sure that there aren't blind spots there from being in an echo chamber.
Another point is that as a leader, are you going far enough to encourage people in your team to share some of their lived experiences that they haven't shared up to now? Have you built enough psychological safety within your team that people are willing to do that? Because then there's more resources for you as a team. So, Jamie, we're going to come on to your hot seat questions. What inspires you in life?
You know, it is such a magical, complex, interesting, I'm going to cry. It is such a beautiful world. People are wondrous. Nature is absolutely brilliant and fascinating. And what else do you need to get out of bed in the morning? I mean, it's just a magical place to spin around the universe in.
That's brilliant, brilliant. What brings you energy and motivation in your everyday life?
I joke, I get asked a lot, what keeps me going on some of these difficult topics that I work on, human trafficking, environmental loss, all these things. And I always joke that, we know how it ends. In 4 billion years, the sun blows up. And so every day is worth its own weight, right? Whatever we do in a day, its inherent value is that day. And all we can do is get up and have the best day we possibly can, fight the best fight we possibly can, make the biggest impact we possibly can, make the most people feel welcome in your space. And so instead of worrying about that big, heavy, state of play, waking up today and that and a good cup of coffee.
Now it's the desert island question. What's the one book that you would take?
Interestingly, and I got a lot of flack from my husband for a long time on this, Atlas Shrugged is,
ooh.
Yeah. And he was very horrified at one point to know that is one of, if not my favorite books. And so I told him he was not allowed to comment on it until he had read it in its entirety. And, politically, obviously, both sides of the aisle take and run with Atlas Shrugged. But what I love about it is it kind of comes back to my last answer, is showing up to be wherever you at, whether you're a mom for the day or you're in charge of the dog for the day, or you're at work for the day, or you're, driving the kids to the camping trip, being the best in that day that you can possibly be, just showing up and excelling in that moment, I think is the root of, take away all of the nonsense about capitalism and all of that. The book is fundamentally about bringing your best self to every moment that you can. And I find that to be quite inspirational.
Fantastic. Jamie, you're a star.
Thanks, Bart. Bart, you are also a star.
Thank you. But look, thanks so much, Jamie. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. If it was just a conversation, but it's going to be a brilliant podcast. And
thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
So thanks again for joining us. Remember to hit the subscribe button, and join us again for our next set of lessons. And if you've got any questions or comments, email us at bartsale@breakthroughglobal.com or connect with us directly on LinkedIn at Breakthrough Global.
We'd love to hear your own leadership stories. And we'd also love for you to share this episode on your own social media and review and rate this podcast on your player of choice.
Thanks to our production team, Yulia Sholtisova at Breakthrough Global and Robin Leeburn at Fairly Media. And of course, thank you for listening.